Hotel. What's up? Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. So, our topic for today is going to be from victims, or excuse me, from advocates to victims. And before I get into the topic, and from advocate to victims is going to be about how people who have voted for the current administration are now starting to find themselves victims of that same administration that they voted for. So we'll go over how that is having an adverse effect on many of us, and I say many of us because I've been noting, and to be honest with you, uh, have become a bit irritated in noting how many Black people, particularly even still now, are in fanfare over Trump. They're pointing out uh, how his actions are beneficial, um, and seem to be deluding themselves into believing that somehow this is going to benefit us, benefit them. And it's just really been interesting and really honestly a bit irritating. So we'll get into that and look at what the actual effects uh, have been to this point and project where we see them going. But before that, I want to just share some spiritual insights uh, that I've noticed over the past few days, and we say hotep to my good brother, Dr. T. Hassan Johnson, who's tuning in. And of course, we affectionately know him as the Black male advocate. So thanks to the brother, and feel free to chime in if you have something that you'd like to add. I'm sure you do, particularly given the topic. But first, I wanted to go over some spiritual insights and just kind of show you how spirit works. It can work. Just on a personal insight note, there are times when I may struggle with wanting to do, come on and go live and speak. And part of that struggle ends up being with coming up with a topic, and I get caught up thinking that I have to come up with something interesting to say, and so I go through thinking and racking my brain, trying to come up with something. And as long as I'm, in my mind and in my head over trying to figure it out myself, um, I'll struggle with that until I remind myself, or spirit reminds me, that it's not about me, and I just have to quiet my mind and allow uh, the topic to come to me, allow myself to be a vessel for it to come through. And that is how, when I give talks, the talks that I give flow much more easier if I don't do any preparation and just allow spirit to come through me rather than me trying to come up with something to say. Uh, so that's basically what happened today. As I was trying to come up with something to talk about. But one of the things that I had noted just from a an observational standpoint, and I bring that up because I just gave a talk with the Christ Unity Center, and I made it a point, Christ Unity Center of African Spiritual Science. I made it a point to discuss in the lecture, which I called Know Thyself, about how life is a university in and of itself, and we can learn many powerful lessons just by being in observation of what goes on around us, from observing ourselves and how we react to things, and what's causing us to do so. As I was just observing my own self and things that have gone on, I found myself reading a spiritual book, and in that spiritual book, it pointed out how people who have lived what people might refer to as a sinful life, or a life that has not been positive, and they engage in a number of different negative actions, how they can turn a new leaf and be redeemed, and indeed can be a very powerful uh, spiritual person, uh, even become enlightened, um, just through their efforts. And so I'll just read a couple of passages from it, and just kind of show you how things work. If you're paying attention, how you'll notice certain things. And here is a book about lessons from my spiritual master Amma. This book is called On the Trail of Liberation, and in it says the Lord Krishna, which is one of the Indian manifestations of God, avatars. It says, Lord Krishna declares, even if the worst sinners worship me with one pointed devotion, they are to be considered righteous, for they have resolved properly. Such is the potency of devotion that the sinner becomes saintly. My classic examples of this are Angulimala and Valmiki. Before they turned over a new leaf, both had robbed and killed. After cultivating exclusive devotion towards God, they became paragons of virtue. And Krishna then asks his devotee Arjuna to declare boldly that no devotee of mine is ever lost. So I read that, and it moved me. And after I completed the book, I looked at the airplane entertainment system because I was reading the book on my way home from Chicago. And I was led to watch the movie, uh, The Book of Clarence. And I found the book to be the movie to be particularly uh, insightful and in accordance with what I had just read in the book. The movie, The Book of Clarence, was about a brother who lived in the time of the Christ and uh, was not a believer. He considered the Christ to be an illusionist. That he was fooling the people. He didn't believe in the existence of God, and so he just felt like he was just deceiving the people. He he was like a hustler, during those times. He wasn't, he sold weed, he, he gambled, um, he stole, but the brother seemed to have a pretty good heart. And he had a twin brother who was one of Jesus' disciples, Thomas. And ostensibly, you would have thought that Thomas was the better person. But though Thomas ran with the Christ, was part of his the disciples, it was more, he was not an embodiment of the teachings that he was getting from the master. Uh, in the movie, he had turned his back on his mother. Um, he looked down on his brother. He was full of ego. Um, and, he shunned him away. There was a scene where Brother Clarence had asked to join the disciples, and he was just shooed away and told that he wasn't worthy. So Brother Clarence decided that he's going to go and be a Messiah himself, and that he would do the same hustling that he thought that the master Jesus was engaged in. He even, went to visit his parents to figure out how he was doing those illusions and tricks to get those followers. Um, and so he ended up just coming up on his own with different tricks and was able to um, amass a bit of a following and started to be able to raise a lot of money, get a lot of donations as as many of our church pastors in the community do. Um, but while he's doing that, unlike some of our um, community ministers, uh, he he begins to have a crisis of conscience, and he decides that he wants to go free a slave. In fact, he was in trouble with a local gangster, if you will, owed him money, and he told him that he would forgive his debt if he were to go and free a slave. And he had to defeat someone named Barnabas, who was very strong, and he ended up defeating him um, and freed him. But as he was going through his ministry and raised money, um, it it made him reflect upon that there were a number of different slaves in addition to Barnabas, and so he took that money and decided that he would free all the slaves, not just Barnabas, that he would free them all. And in so doing, he gave him all the money that he collected, um, instead of paying it to the guy that he owed money to, who had vowed that he would kill him, and thus he paid up. And so he put his own life in jeopardy to free uh, those who were enslaved. And to not give the whole story, he ended up basically being redeemed, and found great favor with God. Um, Not because of what he called himself, not because of what group he belonged to, like his brother Thomas, but based upon what was in his heart and his actions, to be selfless and help others. And that was how he found favor with God. And so Spirit led me to watch that movie to underscore what I had just read in the book, to really impart that it's not really about what group that we belong to. It's not about what we may choose to call ourselves. It's about how we live our life, how we impact others, how we help others, how we lift other people up. You know, will we self-sacrifice at times? To help others. Uh, that's what life is really, about in this drama. We all have a part to play in this human drama, and it's about our actions. That we draw merits from this life. So that is just a spiritual lesson that I wanted to impart. You know, um, in the Kemetic teachings, uh, it demonstrates that we go through the judgment scene, and uh, we go before the scales of Ma'at, and our heart is to be weighed, with uh, a feather, and our heart is based upon our deeds and actions, and the intent behind them. And if our heart is light because we hold no guilt that we've done good in our lives, then our heart can be weighed to be in balance. Our heart is light, and that balances the scale. That we've made a positive effort to do good. And so we gather and create karma for ourselves. We can create positive or negative karma, and hopefully, we've made more deposits in the karmic bank than we've made withdrawals. So that's my short spiritual lesson there. I hope that might have a positive effect on you. So now we'll go into life, because life is part of the human drama. Spirituality is not an escape. We practice spirituality so that we can navigate the physical realm, and not be perturbed by it, and be at peace. and be able to handle whatever is transpiring, um, and knowing that things are going to work out for us, uh, and not getting caught up in it uh, through negative emotions, which is going to be particularly important in the coming uh, years because of what's going on right now. And so it's going to be very important that we are practicing the spiritual principles that we've learned, because we're going to be required to, uh, based upon what we're going to be facing. So with that, um, so a number of people, including Black people, other peoples of color, Latinos, have found themselves tricked, deceived into voting for Donald Trump and the people that he has in his administration, or bringing into the administration, and those who even operate outside of the administration, like Elon Musk, who are exerting great influence. Um, and as we know, the uh, Zionist influence as well. So many of our people voted under the illusion that there would be some benefit to doing so. Uh, to some extent, it could be somewhat understandable if one is not closely paying attention. Certainly, uh, the options were, or option uh, was not good. There was not a really um, discernible choice between the two candidates, and uh, based upon the agenda of the so-called opposition, um, I could see where one may consider one to be the lesser of two evils. Um, and part of the deception is that the Trump administration did a couple of things that on the surface would appear to be good, or actually, may have been beneficial. Certainly, some people may look positively at the fact that uh, he nominated RFK Jr., who was, I would say, would be a better advocate for health uh, than someone like Anthony Fauci. Um, some of the things that were said that were going to be done, uh, of course, the draining of the swamp illusion. Um, so there were some things that were being said that compelled people to want to vote and support him. But now that he's taken office, he's actually implemented some things. And for those people who may have tuned into a prior show, we talked about the what was that, Operation 2025, and we've seen that the playbook that was outlined in that Operation 2025 is being adhered to by Trump, and the effect of it uh, so far has been adverse to some of the people who, particularly people of color, who have voted for Trump. One of the first things that has been done by the Trump administration was the so-called attack reduce the size of the federal government under the auspices of uh, reducing waste and uh, increasing efficiency. Uh, and basically following the stereotype of uh, lazy government workers. Now, that is a racist trope for people who don't know. Um, for back in the early 1900s, there was always that caricature of the lazy uh, black person. And that stereotype holds true in terms of its perception of government workers, because there are a number of government workers who are black. And it's been well known that black people have gravitated to government work, government service, because in the government, particularly federal government, the government is less inclined to engage in discriminatory practices. Um, Much less so than, not to say that it doesn't happen, but they're less inclined to do so than private industry. So, uh, because of that, many black people have gravitated to government service. And so, when Trump comes out and talks about uh, reducing waste, he talks about and criticizes government workers for being uh, lazy and inefficient and wasting money. What he's talking specifically about black people. Okay. And so when he's threatening to fire and lay off, uh, reduce the size of the federal workforce, he's talking about putting black people out of work. And I've seen a number of people talk about on social media, um, and he actually even being in support of these actions, um, not taking into account the effect that it is going to have and uh, is going to have on the community. I know that thus far about 60,000 people have been scared and frightened into resigning. Um, I foresee that this is going to um, have a devastating effect on the community, particularly as the private industry has uh, been inclined to roll back, eliminate uh, diversity programs, so-called DEI programs, and DEI has been, just like the term woke, been co-opted into a negative connotation. Uh, Even distorted into representing reverse discrimination, if there's such a thing, and there's not. Uh, the diversity programs were meant to try to create equity to make up for the affirmative action that white people have afforded themselves ever since they took this country from the Native Americans, from our Native American ancestors. They initiated programs that uh, only they benefited from in exclusion of other people. And when Black people came together to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, as it were, creating their own communities, such as the Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, those were destroyed. So we had the civil rights era where uh, they fought for uh, rights designed to try to bring about equity. Uh, I honestly was not an advocate of integration. I thought the integration uh, movement was in error, uh, not because I believe that people should not interact, but because of the fact that all ethnic groups within this country work together to create their own economies. And integration was something that uh, destroyed that, which existed for Black people in the country. But I said all that to say, part of the civil rights administration, or excuse me, civil rights activities that had occurred in the 60s and 70s were designed to bring equity that was out of balance because of the advantages that white people had for centuries, to try to be a means to uh, bring about equity, to bring about uh, fairness, uh, not to discriminate, but to bring about fairness, equity. Equity is not a negative thing. Okay, to balance the scales, as it were. Okay, so now we have Trump, who has basically reversed the diversity and equity programs, eliminated them, um, and he's going about eliminating uh, jobs, specifically in the government, where a lot of Black people have worked. Another part of the pillars of the uh, Operation 2025 has been deportations. And there were a number of our Latino brothers and sisters who also found themselves uh, deluded into voting for Trump. And but Trump is true to his word, and we'll see what has happened to them right after the election. I was reading an article today that even Latinos who are here legally, who are citizens here, who were born here, are also afraid of being rounded up by ICE because of racial profiling. There was a story about one woman who is afraid to leave her house, and her son, keeps telling her it's okay, but she's afraid. But as you see, the fact that this man advocated, he was a, a very demonstrative, it seems here, supporter. Uh, he's been rounded up and he's leaving too. I want to share an article that I came across today, which will go into. So we see here, Elon Musk joined President Trump in the Oval Office to talk about his efforts to significantly reduce the size of government by instructing heads of federal departments and agencies to undertake plans for large scale reductions in force. And this is the implementation of a strategy that was created by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Now, mind you, Elon Musk is not a part of the administration, has no governmental authority, has no right to be uh, setting policy for the government. Yet, um, government heads are being compelled to capitulate and follow the orders, and also being compelled to open up their records to this private individual and private group who's directing the actions of government, which I would put forth to say is illegal. He says during the press conference here, Elon Musk, who again is not part of the government, he says it's not optional to reduce federal expenses, it's essential. Um, Now, mind you, when he talks about reducing federal expenses, um, what are we really talking about here? Okay, it's not about reducing federal expenses. This is a wealth transfer move. Okay, taxpayer dollars are not going to be saved by closing these departments, because someone's going to have to provide these services. Okay, so eliminating governmental departments is not going to save taxpayer money, because what's going to happen? Who's going to provide those services now when you close these departments and put Black people and a number of people of color who have gotten jobs with the government because uh, they're not inclined to experience the same degree of uh, discrimination as they would in the private sector? They're going to be put out of work and be subject to trying to compete for jobs with private companies who have the right to be selective or uh, discriminatory in their selective selection practices as they did before. It's not about merit, because prior to the uh, affirmative action, uh, equal opportunity legislations that Black people fought for, more qualified Black people were being turned away for jobs. It's not about merit, it never has been. Black people now will be less inclined to be able to attain education, to make themselves to be qualified to be able to compete for these jobs. This is what the result of dismantling diversity and equity programs is going to be. It's not going to create equity, it's going to create more disparity. And our people voted for that. So, what's going to happen when the government is dismantled, when services provided by the government are eliminated? Who's going to provide these services? Well, they will be privatized. Perhaps one of Elon Musk's companies will bid to provide that service. Or some other individual who works for one of the think tanks who has come up with this strategy. Think tanks that are funded by uh, the elite companies such as a uh, Goldman Sachs or uh, Rockefeller Foundation or something like that. But typically, when government services are privatized, they don't save the taxpayers money. What typically happens is that these private firms uh, increase the waste because they charge more money for the same services that the government was providing efficiently and at a much lower cost. Privatization has never saved any money. It just gives a means for private companies to fleece the taxpayers out of money without it being able to be checked. At least in the government services are subject to being audited. Those standards don't exist when private companies take over and provide these services. More waste uh, comes as a result of that, and people aren't aware of that. Uh, there are countless examples of how government contractors defraud the taxpayers but it's a means to transfer the wealth from the taxpayers to private individuals who already have money. It's a further transfer of wealth. It is not draining the swamp of the elite, as we've discussed in prior shows. Trump is part of the swamp, and he's been put into place by the same people who represent the swamp, or what he calls the deep state. He's part of that, as are all the people who are in his administration and outside of it, as Mr. Musk is. He goes on to say the people who voted for major government reform, the people voted for major government reform, and that's what the people are going to get. People didn't vote for that. Um, Responding to detractors who call Dodge's involvement a hostile takeover. That is a hostile takeover. Um, it's basically a coup. Says agency heads are ordered to coordinate and consult with Dodge, Elon Musk's group, to shrink the size of the federal workforce and limit hiring to essential positions. Again, this is not part of the government. Why should federal agency heads have to coordinate and consult with Dodge? Agency heads shall promptly undertake preparations to initiate large-scale reductions in force consistent with applicable law. All officers that perform functions not mandated by statute or other laws should be prioritized in the cuts. The joint appearance marked the first time the billionaire SpaceX CEO is taking questions from reporters in a public setting since he's assumed power in Trump's second term. Musk took several questions from reporters, defending Dodge's accountability and insisting he won't engage in work that poses potential conflicts of interest. Through SpaceX, Musk has billions of dollars in contracts with the Pentagon. Okay. He already has contracts with the Pentagon, as do many who provide such advice as Dodge, or many think tanks that end up influencing public policy. The members of the think tanks typically represent companies like Elon Musk's company, and when they recommend those actions, they do so because they're going to benefit from it financially. They're not doing it out of a sense of interest in the public good, benevolence. They're doing it to benefit themselves. The Trump administration has signaled furloughs and layoffs are likely if not enough federal workers agree to the buyouts. More than 60,000 workers have accepted the buyouts, about 2.6% of the workforce. Okay, now let's think about here. I'll just go over this before I finish my thought. Um, Hiring is going to be no more than one after they enact the layoffs. They will only hire one employee for every four employees um, who are let go. Um, and as people are being of color being deported, there's talk about allowing migrants from immigrants rather from uh, white companies, white countries rather, to come into uh, this country, and there'll be some job openings for them. So I can remember the thought train that I was going on before I came back to make this point. The effect that this is going to have um, on the economy, because that's another reason why ostensibly uh, this new administration was about the power under the auspices that um, his actions will benefit the economy. Okay, so we've already seen um, that there's an intention to enact tariffs, which is going to make goods, imported goods, more expensive, which will increase inflation. As people are put out of work, they will be less able to spend because they will have less money because they're out of jobs. 60,000 people right now with more planned will increase in unemployment. But with people having less money to spend in an economy that's already teetering, is going to have an adverse effect on the economy when it comes to be macroeconomic effects. And when I say macroeconomic, it's how the effect ends up multiplying when you take into account what ends up happening. When people have less money to spend, that in turn ends up the hurting retailers. Sales decrease as retailers are hurt. They end up having to enact layoffs to save money on expenses because they're not generating as many sales, which then in turn creates more unemployment, less money to spend. And so it ends up being a continuous downward cycle. That's the macroeconomic effect. Okay. And so those who are under the illusion that these actions that would be taken by this administration would benefit the economy are sorely mistaken. It's going to hurt the economy. Which is going to also have um, a disproportionately negative effect on Black people and other people of color. I'll share one other piece that this was sent to me I do want to share this. See if I can get it from the start.
His policies, if implemented, would slow the dispossession.
See if I can get it from the start. Bear with me. Can't see the bar. I may have to.
Whites in the United States. If you were to deport all illegal immigrants, if you were to think very hard about letting in any Muslims, all of this would slow the rate at which whites are becoming a minority.
Why are you so worried about the white dispossession of America?
Because I want my people to survive. Is that so strange?
I want to know how it is you voted for Donald Trump when you're so into facts, because his entire campaign is not based in facts. It was all based in propaganda and emotion.
I voted for Donald Trump for one reason only. His policies, if implemented, would slow the dispossession of whites in the United States. If you were to deport all illegal immigrants, if you were to think very hard about letting in any Muslims, all of this would slow the rate at which whites are becoming a minority.
Why are you so worried about the white dispossession of America?
Because I want my people to survive. Is that so strange?
I want to know how it is you.
Okay, so I wanted to share that. Is this possibly what this is all about? Something to think about. So what was it that was voted for those who advocated and continue to advocate for Trump? Why do you think there's consideration to allow white people from South Africa to come into this country, particularly when Black and people of color are being displaced from jobs, being deported, being laid off from positions that they've had for years, positions that they've had because of the fact that government is not allowed to discriminate to the same extent that private industry can, particularly now that affirmative action protections have been dismantled. Is that going to make it easier for Black people to be able to compete in private industry? Is that what you voted for? Those of you who have supported this administration? Well, some of you, some of us are going to have to live with that decision. Is there anything good to come out of it? Possibly. Because things are going to get difficult. Things are definitely going to get difficult for Black people in this country. And hopefully, this will spur us into some semblance of unity, because it's going to take unity in order to be able to deal with what we're going to be faced with. We're going to need to be able to support each other. We're going to need to help bring each other up. We can't continue to engage here as individuals and to be to take on the behavior of the oppressors and just be selfish in our motivations. We have to live according to spiritual principles to lift each other up. to support each other, to not just be about ourselves, to not live based upon greed and ego. That's what it's going to have to take, for us to be able to survive here now. Things will be hard. And though I always hated this song growing up, we shall overcome. But in order to overcome, we're going to have to be working with each other and supporting each other and helping to lift each other up. So with that, I'll bid you a hotep and Kemetic words of peace. And we'll see you next time here on Journey in the South. Hotep.